Hello again. We kind of left off in this treatise from the book, chapter 3 of the book of the Covenants of the Gods. That's a free PDF ebook written by a friend of mine named Gregory Williams. And you can get a copy of that book online in a link in the description of this video. And where we left off talking about Twining versus New Jersey from the quotes here in the last video. And we're going to pick up here in the paragraph here after those quotes from Twining versus New Jersey. It says, "It is understandable that the average person might not think that this was the case, but most people also don't understand that America was a republic prior to the acceptance of the Constitution, and even before the Declaration of Independence. Nor do they realize the true nature of that republic and the motivation of those people who populated it. Many don't realize that the majority of the people in America were in opposition to the ratification of the Constitution of the United States at the time of its creation by the individual states. Those states remained as free, as foreign to each other as Mexico is to Canada." Footnote 17, which is Clark's Summary on American Law, Constitutional Law. Again, that's that book right there. Let me scroll down here. Both before and after the Constitution, yet all these historical and legal facts are well documented in history. Quote, "Just as the Revolutionary Adams opposed the Constitution in Massachusetts," that's Samuel Adams, "so did Patrick Henry in Virginia, and the contest in that most important state of all was prolonged and bitter. He who in Stamp Act days had proclaimed that there should be no Virginians, no New Yorkers, but only Americans, now declaimed as violently against the preamble of the Constitution because it began, 'We the people of the United States,' instead of 'We the state.' Like many, he feared a consolidated government and the loss of states' rights. Not only Henry, but much abler men such as Mason, Benjamin Harrison, Monroe, Richard Henry Lee, I would add Melacton Smith, my favorite anti-federalist, were also opposed and debated, others in what was the most acute discussion carried on anywhere." Quote, "Owing to the way in which the conventions were held, the great opposition manifested everywhere." Now, think about that today. How many people would think that the Americans back in the 1780s would be opposed to this Constitution that they hold sacred and dear? But just about everybody was. And the management required to secure the barest majorities for ratification, it seems impossible to avoid the conclusion that the greater part of the people were opposed to the Constitution. They were much smarter than we are. Things would be a lot different if we just had the Declaration of Independence and we were just a bunch of common law allodial freemen living by the natural law, or even under the Articles of Confederation. It would be completely different today. And then from the Constitution, you got reconstructed, and then the New Deal, and man, oh man, you just went straight on into total communism, and now you're gradually working into absolute totalitarianism. And it's all done by consent. Don't point the finger at Nancy Pelosi. Don't point the finger at Mitch McConnell. Don't point the finger at JFK or Donald Trump or Barack Obama or anybody else. You did this. We all did it, individually. It was not submitted to the people directly. Okay, the Constitution was not submitted to the people for a popular vote. And in those days of general limited suffrage, even those who voted for delegates to the state conventions were mostly of a propertied class, although the amount of property called for may have been slight. Now, these quotes were coming from footnote 18, History of the United States by James Truslow Adams, Volume 1, page 258 through 259. I actually have that series in the living room. So you can get these, you can get all these books. They're available if you're interested in having these in your own library at home, so you can teach your children and your grandchildren the real truth of how this nightmare has evolved by our own consent, our own choices. You can do that. Was the Constitution of the United States ever ratified, and what is its true source of authority? There has been serious questions raised and continuous arguments made about the lawful passing of certain amendments. The fact is that the Constitution of the United States was never ratified according to the law at the time. And its creation was an act of revolution against the law and the will of the people. Wow. Now, I showed you this quote before, and Greg in his book has put it in here again. This is again from this book, Summary of American Law by Clark, who was a law professor. He writes in it, if a constitution expressly provides that it may be amended only in a certain way and another way followed, such an attempted amendment is illegal. But if it's acquiesced in, it becomes effective as a peaceful revolution, such as took place when the United States Constitution took effect upon the ratification by 9 states, actually 11, I think, originally, but in the Constitution itself, it said only 9 had to ratify, in spite of the fact that the old Articles of Confederation provided that they should not be amended without unanimous consent of the states. And I talked about why that's important in a republic. You must have unanimous consent, one accord by all parties. There is no majority rule or democracy in a real republic. Okay, you can't take someone's rights and property away by the vote. You can't do that. It has to be unanimous consent. Ignorance and vanity tempered with apathy and avarice are the greatest allies to tyranny. No kidding. That is absolutely a true statement. So what is the authority that makes the Constitution of the United States and its amendments the law of the land and the authority in our lives? Because the constructive and direct waivers by the states, it has become common today to hear the once sovereign states referred to as only quasi-sovereign. Citizenship is the status of being a citizen and may include membership in a political society, implying a duty of allegiance on the part of the member and a duty of protection on the part of society. Again, footnote 20, that's Loria versus U.S. 231, U.S. 934, Supreme Court 10-1358, and that's, you can also find that in Black's Third on page 330. Whether a citizen is a natural inhabitant or has obtained membership in a political society, he has certain rights, although those rights may differ. The natural inhabitant may be a member of a society or civitas, but he remains an individual with civil rights within the general body. Those civil rights are such as belong to every citizen of the state or country, or in a wider sense to all its inhabitants, and are not connected with the organization or the administration of the government. They include the rights of property, marriage, protection by laws, freedom of contract, trial by jury, etc. An individual who becomes a member or person in the political society also has civil rights, but the origin of those rights, being political, are are rights pertaining or relating to the policy or administration of government. This is called public policy. This is what you're voting on, all the time. This is what you're sending when you vote to send a representative to create law for you. They're enacting public policy for the corporation and the members of the corporation. And again, the more you contract into the various offers that they come up with, like Social Security and blah, 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 remember, you don't own anything. The rights are kind of, real rights are dependent upon that allodial status. Freeman status is dependent upon allodium, not these legal rights to possess and use the state's property. So this is what's devolved now into these civil rights, which are really privileges and immunities under license and permit. And, there's a lot of regulation and control that goes along with that. Very sad. So as otherwise defined, civil rights are rights appertaining to a person in virtue of his citizenship in a state or community. Rights capable of being enforced or redressed in civil action. Also a term applied to certain rights secured to citizens of the United States by the 13th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution and by various acts of Congress made in pursuance thereof. Okay, so again, these are the privilege and immunities spoken of in the 14th Amendment. And of course, all these characteristics, all these things that we are calling rights, depending on the source of those rights, whether that's the Creator God or this God called the state or United States, those are sometimes qualified rights, like from the state and the United States, or they're really unqualified and inalienable. And again, remember, inalienable are rights that you have that they can't be taken from you. You have to willingly, voluntarily contract loss of access to them. And I showed you that in the previous video, kind of with your Second Amendment right. By going into the stream of commerce to buy a commercial gun using Federal Reserve note credit in your status as a 14th Amendment citizen with your birth certificate, driver's license, social security number, etc., that's a 14th Amendment civil right that you're exercising, not the common law inalienable right. And there's a difference. I can show you a case where a firearm dealer, we're getting kind of off topic, but real quickly, we can look at that. Basically, a guy had made for himself fully auto machine guns. Well, he had a common law right in those guns because he made it himself outside the stream of commerce. And when the feds came in to seize other stuff that he was doing under his federal firearms license, they also seized the machine guns. But the ATF declared them to be homemade machine guns completely outside the stream of commerce, and the courts had to give them back because they didn't have any authority over those guns. They were outside the stream of commerce. Oh, yeah, see? You can exercise all kinds of rights, but most people don't have ownership of property. Remember, in the law, when you go into that courtroom, here's the middle, and over here are your property rights, and over here is mere matter of regulation through contract. And the judge will look at the paper filed and decide, well, are we talking about a property right, or are we talking about a mere regulation in commerce via contract or civil law? And 99.99% of the time, with all you 14th Amendment citizens, you're over here dealing in your court documents with a mere matter of regulation in civil law and commerce via contract. There's no rights involved. It's just a matter of contract. And that's where you're at. Don't like it? Well, there's options out. Get out. The essential difference would seem that the former are not connected with the organization or administration of government, while the latter are subject. So the civil rights under the 14th Amendment are subject to Congress. They can alter and qualify those any way they want. Now, those common law, natural law rights are beyond Congress's jurisdiction. But you've contracted away access to those. You can get them back, but it's going to take some doing, and you're going to have to change the way you live your life. And we're going to get to that in this series, hopefully sooner rather than later. But you have to understand how you got into the mousetrap, down the rabbit hole, so to speak, before you can find the light to follow to get out of it and stay out of it. That's the problem I have with so many patriot gurus out there selling all kinds of crap to people. They're making you all kinds of promises, but they're just shysters. And they're not really leading you to the light to get out of this trap. They're filling you full of nonsense, and then you get thumped, and then they turn around and say, well, that's just the government usurping power. No. You got to have all your ducks in a row, and they generally only have you get 1 or 2 out of 28 or 30 or 50 ducks that you got to get in a row, depending on how many contracts you have. It is quite clear then that there is a citizenship of the United States and a citizenship of a state which are distinct from each other and which depend upon different characteristics or circumstances of the individual. The rights of a citizen under one state or U.S. may be quite different from those which he has under the other. If the benefit of the latter citizenship includes the duty of subjection, then the assent must require a voluntary consent, or else such citizenship would be nothing more than involuntary servitude. There are countless ways of demonstrating the consummation of a voluntary consent. Okay? Now, as we kind of go through here, many of these things, especially the things in the bold black, those are going to be maxims of law. And remember, a maxim is kind of like, in law, is kind of like a maxim in geometry. It's just an accepted rule. So now this one here is actually a quote from Plutarch. I'm going to scroll up here a little bit. The real destroyer of the liberties of the people is he who spreads among them bounties, donations, and benefits. Now, the philosopher Plutarch wrote that. And it's not that I disagree with this, but he can spread, the Congress can make you, the state can extend any offer it wants to you. So is it really the guy who's spreading the donations, benefits, and bounties? Or is it the fool that accepts them? Who is it that's the real destroyer? If I sit there and offer you all kinds of smack drugs all day from the street corner, it's only the fool that comes up and makes the deal with me that now gets hooked on the drug. It's not the people that walk by and wave their finger and say, yeah, screw you, I don't want to deal with you. So while I agree with him that, yeah, this isn't a good thing that, you got government extending all kinds of these bounties, donations, and benefits, but nobody is holding a gun to your head making you sign up for them. And I've asked that of many people. When you went into a bank to sign a promissory note to get a loan, was the banker holding a gun to your head? Who was holding the knife to your throat? There's a famous proverb that says in the Bible that says, when you sit down to eat with a ruler, be careful, because his meat, I'm trying to remember it completely, but whatever he's serving you, whatever he's offering you, these dainties, these delicacies, these temptations, they're deceitful meat, and they're going to snare you. So the Bible, if you read the Bible and understood it, you wouldn't contract with these nut jobs. That's what God was trying to tell you. Stay away from this crap. It's going to do you nothing but bring you misery. Okay, so let's find out how, and debt is really the snare, okay? Once you've contracted in, but now the fact that most of these benefits are coming to you financed through public debt, oh my, that's like, might as well just jump off the cliff now, lemming. The United States federal government gives to its citizens, but only after they have bound themselves as eligible members. I can't get anything from the government. I don't get any checks coming to me as a denizen for bailouts. I didn't get a check. I don't get any Social Security. I can't apply for any of that crap. I'm not a member. Now, I dwell in America, on the American landmass. I dwell in the land called Iowa. But I'm not a corporate member. Now, we're going to find out that that doesn't mean that there's some laws I got to keep. If I engage, I got to keep those laws and I got to honor. And that comes from the Bible too. Render to Caesar that which is Caesar. Render to God's that which is God's. So I have a qualified allegiance, so to speak. My permanent allegiance is to the Creator of the universe. My qualified allegiance is only a temporary allegiance when I engage the world of the United States in order to, like, basically be a customer in commerce. I don't bitch, moan, and complain about the sales taxes or excise taxes or tributes that I got to give to Uncle Sam for buying gasoline or milk or bread or, a tool in his stream of commerce. I got every right to that tribute. Okay? If all giving was by obligation, there could be no charity. Ooh, very true. It is clear that the government has no binding contractual obligation to give what is its own to another. Oh boy, I got to pull something up here. That just made me think of something that's really powerful for you, thinking of the Ponzi tontine called Social Security. Let me see if I can find this. Okay. All right. This is from a couple of sources. I can't remember exactly which ones. I'll look those up for you, and because I'm sure we'll talk about this again, because I'll probably make a video just on Social Security, because it's a huge nexus. Congress, in its future discretion, remember, there's no property right in Social Security. It's a tontine Ponzi, it's a general tax, okay? Congress could, in its future discretion, I'm reading what's in yellow here, spend that money, the taxes from Social Security, for whatever Congress then judged to be the general welfare of the country, having no constitutional power to earmark or segregate certain kinds of tax proceeds for certain purposes, whether the purposes be farm price supports, foreign aid, or Social Security payments. Okay? When the federal system, now I'm in the green, when the federal system of Social Security was sold as if it was insurance, it was not. There is a great deception, a strong delusion that Social Security taxes are payments of insurance premiums to obtain specified benefits at specified time. There is no such right. The right to alter, amend, or repeal any provision of the tax is hereby reserved to Congress. Therefore, Congress could continue to collect the Social Security payroll taxes even though Congress discontinued all Social Security benefit payments. And if you want the controlling cases on Social Security, I think Fleming versus Nestor is one that's very important. Let me see if I can find one other quick one here. I know we're kind of getting a little off topic here, but this is good stuff. So let me see if I can find that property right. I think I get it listed under. Yeah, there we go. Property rights, hidden issue. Okay, yeah, this is from this one here, and I think some of those other quotes are coming from Helvering versus Davis and Fleming versus Nestor on that previous page. Property rights, the hidden issue of Social Security reform by Charles Rounds, Helvering versus Davis, 301 U.S. 619, 1937. In Fleming versus Nestor, decided in 1960, the Supreme Court ruled that Social Security is an umbrella term for two schemes, tontine Ponzi, that are legally unrelated. One is a taxation scheme, the other a welfare scheme. Workers and their families have no legal claim on the tax payments. Those are burnt sacrifices, kids. When you pay a tax to your God, the state or United States or city or county or whatever, those are burnt sacrifices. You have absolutely no say how your God uses what the tributes that you are required to pay by contract. Okay? So workers and families have no legal claim on the tax payments that they make to the U.S. Treasury or that are made on their behalf. Those funds are gone, burnt up, commingled with the general assets of the U.S. government. This decision rested on a previous case, Helvering versus Davis, in which the court ruled that Social Security was not an insurance program. You don't have any property rights in Social Security. It's a tax. It's what kind of tax is it? It's a tribute for the privilege of being employed in the stream of commerce, earning Federal Reserve note dollar monetized debt units for probably some sort of regulated and controlled licensed artificial business entity from corporation, LLC, sole proprietor, LLP, etc. that's licensed to do business in the stream of commerce under the maritime commercial civil law. Oh boy. It's a big nexus. It's a big Gordian knot. Or like, what was the comedian? George Carlin said, "It's a big club and you ain't in it." Well, you're the human resource that feeds the club members. Okay, let's go back to... Okay. Let's continue on here. A thing is said given when it's yielded otherwise than by virtue or of right. A gift is said to be pure and simple when no condition or qualification is annexed. It's obvious that the government never gives a pure and simple gift. It is not only by sworn oaths or pledges of allegiance that we are made subject to government, but by acceptance and performance, compelled performance. No one is obliged to accept a benefit against his consent. But if he does not dissent, he will be considered as assenting. So once you're a 14th Amendment citizen with the birth certificate, Social Security number, whatever, you got to dissent. You got to say, no, I don't want this. I don't want it. I don't want this benefit. So when you get a bailout check from the government for COVID, did you sign on there refused for legal cause and return it? Of course you didn't, you greedy bastard. You took it and cashed it and spent it. Uh-oh. But by acceptance, then you got to perform. You see how they do this? It's like the Pied Piper. He's playing this music with all these goodies and these sweet things, or better yet, the witch with Hansel and Gretel. Okay? Got all these sweet things for you to eat. Social Security, unemployment benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, health care, Pell Grant, student loans, disability, unemployment benefits, bailouts. Oh my God, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. And you accept them. I'm owed this. I'm a taxpayer. I paid in. I'm owed. Oh boy. Oh boy. This being a maxim and fundamental law of nature, all men in possession of their natural perception cannot deny it. Ignorance of conditions and constructions of law can be no excuse. So go ahead, keep sucking on that government tit. It's immaterial whether a man gives his assent by words or by acts and deeds. Maxim of Law. It does not really matter whether we are speaking of a citizenship of a state or the United States. The same voluntary principles still apply. Voluntary principles. It is basically understood that merely being native born within the territorial boundaries of the United States of America does not make such an inhabitant a citizen of the United States subject to the jurisdiction of the 14th Amendment. Remember, we read that already. That's from Elk versus Wilkins. If an individual or an inhabitant became a citizen of the United States under the 14th Amendment, for whatever reason, he would be a member of that same political body and therefore would be considered legally born again, born again, into the United States as a person. With a birth certificate, he could apply for the privileges of that membership and incur the binding obligations of that legal association. Ouch. But a person born in the United States has rights under this amendment, the 14th, to remain a citizen unless he chooses to voluntarily relinquish that citizenship. Kids, you can get out of this nonsense anytime you want. Anytime you choose. But you have to stop eating at that trough. Quit sucking on that teat. You got to stand up and be a man under the common law. And that requires a lot of personal strict liability. And a lot of, now the things that you've turned over to the state to do, you got to start doing them again. To every man, his own house is the safest refuge. That's where you're king, under the common law. But why would someone wish to relinquish their U.S. citizenship as a member of such a beneficially affluent political body? Greg lays it on pretty thick here. Why? Yeah, man, you get a lot of stuff as a 14th Amendment citizen. Man, woo! They lay it on thick, baby. Do the cons of such a seemingly harmless relationship with a generally benevolent entity outweigh the pros of such a prosperous civil status so that someone, anyone, would want to completely abstain from its generous benefits? Or is it the membership's requirements to waive our God-given rights and the denial of our universal truths that calls the individual to abandon mere social securities, economic comforts, and apparent gains of entitlements? Are there higher principles? Hebrews 11:25. Choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. What's sin? The transgression of the law of God, the natural law, the common law. So by joining this little party, you're not suffering, enduring ill treatment like a denizen does. I can't go in and do a lot of the things that 14th Amendment citizens can do. But I'm one of the people of God. You can be too. To enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. I don't want to do that. The citizenship by membership also includes a duty of allegiance on the part of the member, allegiance to a society or government that supplies the citizen with protections. Seems like no less than a reasonable exchange of consideration. Remember the 4 elements of contract: offer, acceptance, consideration, or reciprocity, and a time frame. What's the time limit here on all this stuff? Your civil life, the lifetime of your civil life, which is directly connected to your natural life, because you're choosing to animate this legal fiction called a person with your natural life to live a civil life on the civil law stage. But before we agree to grant our allegiance, we should examine and understand the full extent of the price we shall be called to pay. Did you ever do that? Before you signed up for anything with the government, did you ever stop and examine the statutes, read the acts of Congress to see what the price is that you pay? No. No, I can't imagine any of you that went to public schools ever did that. There's just a few of us oddball iconoclasts that ever do stuff like that. Man's primary allegiance is to his vision of truth, and he is under obligation to affirm it. The concept of allegiance is defined in Black's Law Dictionary as the obligation of fidelity, faith, and obedience, which the individual owes to the government under which he lives, and to his sovereign, i.e. God, in return for the protection he receives. It may be an absolute and permanent obligation, or it may be qualified and temporary. This, of course, only refers to a citizen that is a member, as opposed to one that is a mere inhabitant. Okay, this is me. I've already made all this correction of status. I was this for many years. I grew up this, just like you probably. But I corrected my status, and now I'm just this. As an example, natural allegiance, as stated in English law, is due from all men born within the king's dominions, immediately upon their birth, which is intrinsic and perpetual, which cannot be divested by any act of their own. Such acts, in principle, would include the Declaration of Independence and the so-called American Revolution. If America and its freemen domiciled on their own land had not already been removed from that particular dominion from the king many years before by the manumitting charters of Charles I and Charles II. Okay, those charters were fashioned after the bishopric of somewhere in England. And the king gave away a lot of rights and power over the the colonies in America under those charters by Charles I and Charles II. And that's what separated these Americans from that natural allegiance in English law that was due to under the king's dominion, because Charles I and Charles II did those charters. Now, here's a maxim of law. The civil law reduces the unwilling freedman to his original slavery. There you are. The civil law reduces the unwilling freedman to his original slavery. Now, actually, you were never a free man. Your ancestors were, probably 4 or 5 generations ago. And they're the ones that started this contracting nonsense, and it's just been perpetuated by each passing generation more and more. But the laws of the Anglos judge once manumitted as ever after free. So once you get manumitted from this, once you correct your status and return to this common law, it's only you again that can bind yourself up, because you're free. See, we enslaved ourselves. We have to free ourselves. We have to free ourselves. Now, what's the only other form of law on earth that we have to return to where we have freedom? You got to return to that Torah. You got to return to that law of nature and nature's God. Okay? This maxim of English law was either forgotten or ignored by George III, although it was proclaimed by many men of England in Parliament at the time, and it was the usurpation by George of the rights of the free men living in the American republics which gave lawfulness to the Declaration of Independence. In actuality, it was the king who did the revolting, not America. George III violated those charters. He breached contract and he breached the English common law. And that gave them the authority, once they followed all the proper legal accoutrement of latches and estoppels, which they did. They put the king on notice in writing several times, telling him, stop, don't. Kind of like Willy Wonka, when he was warning the kids to not do this stuff. he'd say, stop, don't. Okay, the Americans here kept repeating through latches and estoppels, telling the king, stop, don't. You're screwing up here, dude. You always want righteousness on your side. The Americans early in had righteousness on their side. The king was the one committing the unlawful and illegal acts, not the Americans. And they remained righteous throughout this. They didn't go lose their head and start screaming up and down and pawing and blasting and stomping and screaming that they have rights. Okay? This is a very important thing out of the scriptures. Art thou called being a servant? That's where you're at right now. You're in bond servitude by your own making, voluntary bond servitude under this Babylonian, Roman, Egyptian civil law nightmare of commercial statutory law made by your gods, the state and the United States, and your city and your county. Okay? So, art thou called being a servant? I'm calling you. I'm calling you out right now. Hey, come on out of this beast system. Come on. There's a bunch of freedom over here. Let's return to our father's estate. Quit playing around on the pig farmers slopping pigs on this vicarious pater's estate, this substitute father. Are you called being a servant? Hey, care not for it. But if thou mayest be made free, choose it rather. 1 Corinthians 7:21. Now, the Apostle Paul here is telling you something really important. This is a journey. Don't go running and jumping off a cliff like a lemming. And that's what a lot of these patriot gurus have you doing. You got to get all, I've said it before, you got to get all your ducks in a row. If you have just one duck out of alignment, that civil law God is going to come and thump you. And then you're going to bitch, moan, and complain. But it's not the civil law God's fault. You're trying to do something. Remember, you're living in your daddy's house, Uncle Sam's house, and you're a dependent kid. And you want to move out of daddy's house. Can you just take anything out of daddy's house without his permission? Or when you move out of daddy's house, are you going to have to leave a lot of that stuff behind that you were using? Ooh, yeah, because daddy's not going to give it to you. The principle upon which natural allegiance stands, although presented under other names, is the basis of the obedience owed a father by his children. That's where we get all this. Parents Patre, parent of the country. Watch that first video in this series. Who's your daddy? What is owed society, or the body that represents society, the government, may not be allegiance. If, for instance, a person has also become a surety for the debts of the society, he may not simply denounce his obligation depending on the nature of that surety. Now, the 14th Amendment allows you to, okay, and that public law that allows expatriation allows you to come out. The United States has given you the opt-out. You can come out. And that's because it's a common law and civil law country. It's got both of these forms of law. You can choose which one you want to be in. My son, again from Proverbs out of the Bible, my son, if thou be surety for thy friend, if thou hast stricken thy hand with a stranger, thou art snared with the words of thy mouth. Thou art taken with the words of thy mouth. Before we give our fidelity, it may be wise to ask ourselves, of what value is our allegiance to the U.S. federal government, and what effect will it have on our relationship to the Creator God? I don't think most people think about that. They just follow the customs and traditions of what's been happening since Reconstruction and the New Deal. This is all they know. If you've been like, what is it, Aristotle or Plato or one of those guys, the cave, if you've spent your whole life in the cave, how do you know what's outside that paradigm? You see, I'm somebody trying to come along and show you, I'm outside the cave. Come on, you can come out of here. If the idea of law has commonly been analyzed as composed of three elements, and I think this is coming from Bouvier's, but we'll check here. First, a command of the lawgiver. Remember, the lawgiver is your God. Second, the obligation imposed thereby on the citizen. Third, a sanction threatened in the event of disobedience. And this is footnote 39. Let's see where that comes from. Yeah, Bouvier's Volume 2, The Definition of Law, down here. Okay. All right. Now, this is very much true. I mean, a law isn't a law unless there's an ordinance or penal clause. If a law isn't backed up by an ordinance, penal clause, then it's just a suggestion. You know, thou shalt drive 55. Okay, well, what happens if I don't? Well, I don't know. Okay, so there's got to be some sort of penalty involved here if you get caught breaking your king's or your God's law. And the penalty is, well, for the first offense, you pay this. If you're going this fast over 55, you pay this, blah, 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 blah. And there's a whole list of ordinances, penal clauses, of what the punishments are. Okay? Then we can see in this definition of the law that there is an obligation imposed upon the citizen. This obligation is imposed by the granting of allegiance by the citizen to the lawgiver. Now, keep this in mind. This is a good place to bring this up. I don't care what you believe, but you didn't just crawl out of a slime pit. You are a created being. Who created you? Well, your father and your mother got together, had sex, and whammo bambo, a sperm fertilized an egg, and 9 months later, you popped out. You're a created being. Now, under the natural law, who is that master that's over you in that state of nature? Your parents. Remember, these governments become your substitute father, and the state, this body politic, becomes your substitute family. They're imitating God's creation. And this is how they can get you to bind into it, because it feels right. This is inherent in you, in your DNA. Okay? But as a created being, you are always, remember that from earlier we read that all this is due, this allegiance is naturally due to your parents. And then we transfer this allegiance to another father. Call no man father upon the earth. Okay? So as a created being, we're always going to be under some sovereign power. And it's our choice as to which sovereign power we want to be under. If you want to think of it this way, we're vassals, sovereigns. Remember, you only have sovereignty over your own choices. My sovereignty stops with me. But I'm under another sovereign. Now I get to choose which sovereign I want to be under. And so do you. Do you want the God, Uncle Sam, or the God, the state of Florida, or the God, the state of Texas? The God, the city of New York? The God, the county of Suffolk? No. Or do you want the God called Yahweh, or Yahuwah, or Jehovah, who rules over you with just 613 instructions rather than 10 millions? Okay, where your inalienable rights come from. Good men hate to sin through love of virtue, bad men through fear of punishment. You see, Abraham didn't need a ruler. He kept the laws. He was able to self-govern. Why? Because he was a good man. He hated to sin through love of virtue, love of righteousness. Wicked people, unrighteous people, fear the punishment. That's what prevents them. They stop and think, well, I might get spanked. I might have to go to jail. I might lose my dinner tonight and have to spend my evening in my room without any dinner. 3x5 cell or a 5x8 cell. Allegiance is, as it were, the essence of the law. It is the bond of faith. Ooh, that's a maxim of law, I think, coming down here. Let's see, 41. Oh, that's from Justice Cook in Littleton 129. Legentia est quasi legis, essentia est vinculum fidei. Probably hack that. Okay. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. Whoops. The evidence of things not seen. Hebrews 11:1. How many people remember a vote is an ardent prayer? How many people hoped for the re-election of Donald Trump, voted, prayed for Donald Trump to be re-elected? 74 million people? Yeah, their prayer wasn't answered, was it? But they still have faith in the U.S. It should be, but they don't like the current God, the current imperator and apotheos and principas civitas that's sitting in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It should be becoming clearer that the granting of allegiance to a lawgiver is a binding act of faith, whether by proclaimed oath or pledge, like when you get naturalized, you take a pledge to obey the laws of the United States and the Constitution and or silent acceptance or application. And it is the essence of the dominion and authority of the lawgiver over the citizen. Oh, we're getting to somewhere good. Let's just keep going. The chiefest part of everything is the beginning. Oh boy, that's a maxim of law. All right, so we got to figure out, where is the beginning of our binding allegiance in this civil system? Is it at the swearing of oaths only? Now remember, not just the pledge, silence, acceptance, or application. By oath alone, we cannot obtain rights and privileges from our lawgiver, sovereign or master, until we had reached an age of reason and competence. Right? You can't go out and apply for Social Security on your own until you're manumitted as an adult. Now, your parents, as your legal guardians, can go sign stuff up for you as a minor, and that's usually what happens. If it begins with our acceptance of or application for benefits, then the point of its binding beginning may be remarkably early. Yeah, like a few hours after you come out from between your mama's legs. Actually, it begins while you're still in your mama's belly. We're going to find that out here. Civil law, because she's a citizen and your daddy's a citizen. Civil law, Roman law, and Roman civil law are convertible phrases meaning the same system of jurisprudence. So whether that's the state of California or the state of Oregon's civil law, or the United States or the state of France or the state of Great Britain, they all have civil Roman and Roman civil law going on here. That's what you're doing in your legislatures and your city councils and your congresses, parliaments and whatever. The natural law and its creator provide for the father and mother as husband and wife to have custody and dominion over their children. Okay? In Roman law, Caesar's rights to his empirical authority and dominion over his subjects stem from his position as the vicarius pater, the substitute father. In Rome, then, as in America today, there is a dual system of citizenship. Then the chief captain came and said unto him, Tell me, art thou a Roman? He said, Yes. And the chief captain answered, with a great sum I obtained this freedom. And Paul the apostle said, but I was freeborn. Acts 22. Tribute is a sum of money paid by an inferior sovereign or state to a superior potentate to secure the friendship or protection of the latter. And excise, tribute, excise taxes now, like income, sales, all that, in its origin is the patrimonial, what does patre mean? Father, right of emperors and kings. Patronus, i.e. our Father. Our Father who art in D.C., hallowed be his name, Uncle Sam, is a vast and interesting subject of a source of understanding. The origin of tithes and taxes and its principles are still quoted in countless cases involving everything from trusts to post limine, but is best discussed in another place. It's only important to mention here because of its principle and origin upon which a proper comprehensive subject that our citizenship is based. Since a natural father gives the benefit of life to his child, right? That's our parents having sex. They're our creators, involving everything from, Since a natural father gives the benefit of life to his child, when the child is in the womb, so also it is important in the scheme of the system of things that the substitute father, vicarious pater, grants benefits to the individual while the child is still in the womb. Maxim of Law. He who is in the womb is considered as born whenever his benefit is concerned. All right, now we're going to get into some good stuff here, so we'll keep going just a little bit longer. How did this happen? Again, everything's by consent. The Shepherd-Towner Maternity Act was for the promotion, the welfare, and hygiene of maternity and infancy and for other purposes. Other purposes, what? It was passed with a vote of 63-7 in the Senate and with a vote of 279-39, scroll up here, by the House. And was finally signed by the President and became law on November 23rd, 1921. The act provided for the current fiscal year, 1922, $10,000 for each state accepting, these are important words, accepting contractual offer. The second aspect, federal government's extending an offer to the state. If the state accepts the offer, the provisions of the act, an additional sum of, was that $1 million? Wow, that's a lot of money in 22. That must be for all the states. The bill was a direct outgrowth of a 9-year study made by the Federal Children's Bureau. Note that the Bureau was not the Federal Bureau for Children, but the Bureau of the Federal Children. Okay, remember of, possessed by. This act and the acceptance, contractual term, of its benefits by the states created the United States Birth Registration Area. Let's go see this footnote, 47. This comes from Public Law 97, 67th Congress, Session 1, Chapter 135, 1921. Okay. All right, so let's keep going here. More of this act, I think. 2, birth registration document. The Social Security Administration, this is later than the 1920s because Social Security didn't happen until the 30s. SSA may enter into an agreement with officials of a state. 2 parties, 2 persons, 2 moral persons contracting to establish as part of the official birth registration process a procedure to assist Social Security Administration in assigning Social Security numbers to newborn children. Where an agreement is in effect, Okay, if it's in effect, then the parties have consented, right? And participating. A parent, as part of the official birth registration process, well, that's nice to know that they're at least included in the process, need not complete a Form SS5 and may request that SSA assign a Social Security number to the newborn child. Now, I'm old enough that my dad did this thing where he was like, and my sister too, one of my sisters, was like, we didn't have Social Security numbers. I was, I think, 12 or 13 when I got a Social Security number. And that's because my dad wanted to start taking us off his taxes as a deduction. Wow. So I had to sign an SS5 form. My mom made me sign it at 12. I didn't know what I was doing when I was 12. But, man, and my parents, see, vanity, jealousy, lust, greed, fear, envy, and sloth. So my parents willingly passed their seed through the fire to Moloch in order to get a tax deduction. Ugh. We're in agreement. Okay. Did the federal government have the right to impose such legislation on the states? Well, they didn't impose it. Remember, this is all being offered by acceptance. They didn't impose anything. In 1923, it was argued by Mr. Alexander Lincoln, Assistant Attorney General of Massachusetts, that the act is unconstitutional. It purports to vest in agencies of the federal government powers which are almost wholly undefined in matters relating to maternity and infancy, and to authorize appropriations of federal funds for the purposes of the act. The complaint went on to state that, quote, the act is invalid because it assumes powers not granted to Congress and usurps the local police power. Oh, I see why he's pissed. He's an agent of the state. He doesn't like his parents' patrie being clipped. The act is not made valid by the circumstance that federal powers are to be exercised only with respect to those states which accept the act. For Congress cannot assume and state legislatures cannot yield the powers reserved to the states by the Constitution. The act is invalid because it imposes on each state an illegal option, either to yield a part of its power reserved by the 10th Amendment or to give up its share of the appropriations under the act. Now stop and think about this for a minute. Didn't we see earlier that the federal government can do with its own what it wills? It's a moral person. It's a corporation. And whatever it has control over, i.e. the U.S. Treasury, it can do with that as it sees fit. You're sitting there clamoring about another bailout check. You know, they promised $2,000 or $4,000, whatever the hell it is. Oh, no, they only want to do $1,400. Now you don't even know if you're getting that. It can do with what is its, according to however it wants to, by its own whim. It's not their share. This is, he's like making this false claim to give up its share of the appropriations under the act. Well, dude, if you want your share, you got to sign up for the act. You got to agree. In the final analysis, the act was an offer from one corporate entity to another. Their constitutional claim, or their claim of it being unconstitutional, was overruled. It was frivolous because it was an offer. It was contracting between two corporate entities for the purpose of providing an avenue for the individual citizen of America. Remember, the 14th Amendment goes back to the 1868. The individual citizen of America to register as a subject of the state and therefore a citizen of the federal corporate state, the true and actual sovereign agent, called the United States. The United States defeated the states in the Civil War. Done. Now it's the master and the states are subservient to it because everybody's a 14th Amendment citizen. The federal government would assume the position of father of the subject citizen according to the laws of parens patriae. Now, the state still has parens patriae powers, But the United States, Uncle Sam, has a greater parens patriae power because the states are under it as well now. It's the higher father. And call no man father upon the earth, for one is your Father which is in heaven. Is the Bible starting to make a little more sense to you? It should. These people that are religious, they just twist this book till you don't understand it. Uncle Sam, the state that you live in, is your father. Well, one's your father, the state's your father, and Uncle Sam is your great uncle. And both of them have this higher authority over you as a God. And you're bound to them. Okay? Now, like I said, there's two systems. You can come out of this anytime you want and come back to be, you can stop being the prodigal son anytime. This was a clear granting of gifts, gratuities, and benefits by the government to a child while he was still in the womb of his natural mother. All the children who were certified by the signature and seal of the natural parents or professional doctor and the representing county and state. Birth certificate, kids. Birth registration, were eligible for further federal and state benefits as a child of the state and federal governments. What was the next benefit you got that's financed by corporate debt? Public school education, more than likely. Your property tax on real property and ad valorem tax on that real estate doesn't cover the entire cost of educating a child in the United States. Okay? The last time I checked, this has been several years ago, but the average cost of just educating a child, now this doesn't include all the capital improvements and all the other things the school district is going on, just the cost of educating a child, a single child, across America, the average was $12,000. And that was several years ago. And the average property tax bill across America was about $3,000. Now that whole property tax bill doesn't go just to the public schools. It goes for your local police, fire, sewers and gutters, 911 service, all kinds of stuff. Okay, so maybe maybe $2,000 out of that $3,000 goes to your public schools. Well, if you have one child in the public school, that's costing $12,000. You pay $2,000. Where's that other $10,000 coming from? Commie? From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. It's coming from your neighbors. You're coveting and using legal plunder to steal from your neighbors. That's just for one kid. Does your property tax bill go up because you got 2 kids registered in the public schools? Of course not. So 2 kids, $24,000, you're still paying 2. Where's that other $22,000 come from? More of your neighbors. There's people in your town that are paying property tax that have never had children. There's people that are elderly, that have never been married, that are paying for your children. Why? Because you passed your seed through the fire to Moloch, the king, and now they're his kids, and he's going to tell you how to educate his kids and how to raise his kids. Go back and watch that first video under Parens Patriae. He's going to tell you if your kids need a vaccination because they're his kids. And you're going to bitch, moan, and complain. But all you got to do is say, well, do you have a marriage license? Do you have birth certificates? Do your children have birth certificates? Do you guys have Social Security? Are you 14th Amendment citizens? Then sit down, shut up, and ride the back of the bus. Do what you're told. Surf. Now, if you don't like it, there's a way out. At one time, a friend tried to obtain a Social Security number for his 9-year-old son. Sounds very similar to what my parents did. So that he could have the benefit of a deduction from his income tax. Yep, this happened in the 60s and early 70s. He was told that he could not get a number for his son without producing the boy's birth certificate. Because the boy did not have one. i.e. date of birth, because he was born at home. Now, natural thing, what we want to do here, we're going to use a different term. If what he was really, this kid without any connection to the state, he had a nativity. Born is kind of a commercial term. But, just for common language, it's okay to use. But, legally, when you're doing documents, you want to use the term nativity for natural things, born for commercial things. They could not grant him the privilege of a Social Security number. As far as they were concerned, the boy didn't exist. What? Even though he was standing there before them. That's right. He's a non-entity. He's not a legal fiction. The boy was not a child of the state because he has not yet been legally born. The person had not been created yet. Remember, man is a term of nature, person of the civil law. The state cannot create the boy. That's for the natural parents to do. They created the boy through the act of sexual intercourse and procreation. The state can only create legal fictions, the person. How do you create the legal fiction? Birth registration creates the person. If you don't register the birth, well, then he's a natural man, not a person. All persons are men, but not all men are persons. Maxim of Law. This process of certifying a natural birth as a legal or connecting birth is not unlike being born again. Ooh, another biblical term, born again. What that certification begins is a process of novation and manumission. Novation is a legal term that means the rewriting of an old agreement. Okay, what was the original agreement? In the natural law, God gave that child to the parents. The parents didn't create the consciousness. The parents created the meat sack, the physical flesh, the bone. But without a consciousness, without a spirit being breathed into that meat sack, it will be stillborn. So where does that consciousness come from? That comes from the Creator God. That consciousness that we can't explain scientifically. We have no idea where consciousness comes from. Well, I do. It comes from God. Comes from this higher creator that was our initial creator that put this whole thing in motion. And we were created in his image, so our parents recreate. That's why, go forth and multiply. Okay, so novation is the rewriting of the agreement. Our parents were the ones that God gave us to as living souls, living nefesh, okay, living men, male and female. Our dads said, you know what, I don't want to take all the responsibility for being a natural father. I'm going to pass my seed through the fire to Moloch, register my child with a birth certificate, and give the child on the altar of the state. I'm going to sacrifice my child on the altar of the state. And that's a rewriting of an old agreement. God wanted you to do this with your children. You said, you know what, I'm going to rewrite this agreement and make it with the state. That's a novation. This certification does not create an everlasting bond of allegiance in itself, but it shows the origins of the process by which a complete and total allegiance and membership is constructed. This is just the beginning, kids. You kept contracting. It is the beginning of the process of legally binding the individual on earth to a political or governmental structure. Allegiance is the tie or ligamen. Ooh, let's talk about that. We'll reread this. Ligamen. Do you know what the root word of legal is? Lignon. What's the root word of ligament? Lignon. What's the root word of religion? Lignon. Lignon is the binding agent. So you're legally, ligaments bind your body together. You know, leg, bones, and all that stuff. Legal is a binding. Religion is a rebinding. Allegiance is the tie or ligament which binds the subject or citizen to the king or government in return for the protection which the king or government affords the subject or citizen. It consists in a true and faithful obedience of the subject to his sovereign, his God. It matters not whether a revocation is made in word or deed. It actually means you got to kind of do both. This process of constructive faith, trust, and allegiance through offers of mutual protection and subjection creates a relationship whereby, quote, the citizen or subject owes an absolute and permanent allegiance to his government or sovereign, or at least until, by some open and distinct act, he renounces it and becomes a citizen or subject of another government or sovereign. The alien, while domiciled in the country, owes a local and temporary allegiance which continues during the period of his residence. Okay, now we're going to stop there. I want to open up something here. Remember I showed you, oh my goodness, where I got to think here. I got to put on my thinking cap. I showed you in a video the other day some definitions from Title 8 of the U.S. Code, which deals with aliens and nationality. And Section 1101 defines terms for that chapter. Okay? Alien. Any person not a citizen or national of the United States. This is dealing with the 14th Amendment. Okay, remember here, Title 8 U.S. Code, Section 1101A22, the term national of the United States means a citizen of the United States or a person who, though not a citizen of the United States, owes permanent allegiance to the United States. Is that starting to make sense now? Title 8 1101A21 defines the term national as meaning a person owing permanent allegiance to a state. When we go back to this God's law book, what did he call his nation? Now, don't confuse it with that other group that's over there in the Middle East. That's a civil law body politic. What did he call his nation of people at Mount Sinai? Defines the term national as meaning a person owing permanent allegiance to a state. What's a state? Remember the definition of a state? It's a corporate body politic. It's a body of men organized under one form of government. Does this law organize a form of government? Does this law have a nation, a body politic of men that have sworn allegiance to a sovereign? What are the territorial jurisdictional limits of this kingdom defined in here, as opposed to the United States? Does it have a geographical territorial limit? Does the state of France, does the nation of France have a territorial jurisdictional limit? How about Brazil? How about that kingdom? Where does this kingdom have a territorial jurisdictional limit? See, you can be in the world, but not of the world. And that's what denizens are. denizens are these inhabitants, native born on the territory, but they're under a different sovereign.